Finnegans Wake took James Joyce 17 years to write, and was written in a way where it should take us 17 years to read. It's written using more than 60 languages, it has no plot, it barely has characters, and no one really understands it, yet it's perceived as a masterpiece. I read it in 4 months, and in the past 10 years, I read hundreds of books, and this one by far was the hardest one, the most complicated one, yet the most rewarding. In this video, I will cover what the novel is actually about. I will do a breakdown of the characters, and this should give you an insight of what is the essence of the book. Then we will talk about on how it was written, focusing on writing devices that James Joyce focused on, because this is the part that confuses most of people, the language. Finally, I will cover the resources that helped me get through it, from book guides, websites, and YouTube channels. And so let's get started. I read Finnegans Wake when I was doing my master's in creative writing because the class was actually the perfect time for my work schedule. And so I had to take it. And for the first month and a half, I hated absolutely everything about my life. It was literally a nightmare, pun intended, for the reasons that makes James Joyce. Typically, I will brag to people about the books that I'm reading, and I'll say something like, hey, I'm reading book X. And they will say,
oh, I've heard about it. What is it about?
And the first thing that will come to my mind is maybe the plot, the main character, the arc of the story, the thing that connected me to the novel. Finnegans Wake has no plot and it's confusing, but in reality the book is about something. It's not a book about nothing, and it's not just a bunch of letters sitting next to each other waiting for you to decipher them for whatever meaning that you can make sense of them. It's about something because it was written by a great writer. In my final research paper, I actually had to distill it to 1 sentence or 2 sentences, and I said something like, it's about a man that falls off of a ladder and dies, and when he wakes up, or when he comes back to his own wake. And from there, it becomes a looping dream that cycles through this family that we will talk about later, and the cycle of history. So the book is about everything and about everybody at the same time. And you will get confused in this video because it's about Finnegans Wake, and it will be magical to make a coherent video about a confusing book without depicting the confusion that makes the book the book. Okay, so this family. The family is made of a father or a husband, a mother, 2 sons who are twins, and a daughter. The family is shifting around all the time in terms of who they are, who do they represent, and they're usually called the Airwickers. They're not necessarily characters, they're not static, they don't stay still. They represent many people or many things in the world, in history. This is as clear as I can get about these characters. But let's go through each one of them so that you can actually have a clearer picture about who you are reading about. And when you come across one of them, even if they have a different name, you know they represent the original family from the Earwickers, the characters in Finnegans Wake. And let's start with the father. This is H.C.E. Humphrey Chumdian Earwicker. He's often referred to as Here Comes Everybody. On the surface level, he is a Dublin pub owner who is moving about life. But at the deeper level, at the transitional, dreamy level of Finnegans Wake, he represents all the fathers in the world and in history, and every fallen man in history. And this fall is often talked about when it comes to Earwicker or when it comes to HCE. And it's about this story that is told in the beginning of the book of something happening, a scandal in Phoenix Park. And it's not a singular story, it's a mystery rather, and it comes in very different versions. So sometimes it's referred to as he made a sexual advance on someone, or he peed in public, and other times is talked about in a way where he was seen naked. But what matters here isn't the scandal itself and the details, but the weight of guilt and shame that HCE is walking around the world with. And that sort of points to the fall of, for example, Adam, peace be upon him, or the prophet Adam, or the fall of kings and presidents and all the rulers of the world that once were on top of the world, on top of the ladder, and fell after years of corruption. Next is ALP, which is his wife, is Anna Livia Palabrabala or Palabrabala, something like that. They're James Joyce's words. This is the mother of the book, and she is HCE's wife, and she is the most celebrated character in the book, I would say, because when it comes to her, she is the one that brings the positive energy per se. She is often referred to as the River Liffey in Dublin because she has this flowy sense of, existence. She is the one that HCE is often visiting this river, and he feels better when he is next to that river because his wife, the river, sort of washes away his guilt. When it comes to her speaking, Joyce uses a very flowy musical language that have turned into songs, and they are one of the most celebrated or the most famous passages in the book because they have a musical sense to them. There is a chapter that it's dedicated by her name, and if you go to it and you read it out loud, it literally feels like a song all throughout. So now we have two characters. One embodies the guilt of history, or someone who's walking around with the weight of guilt, and we have ALP who embodies forgiveness and flowiness and the running water that runs no matter what's happening in the world. It keeps doing its thing, it keeps running. Then we have Shem and Sean, who are the twin brothers, and they are the sons in the family that have some sort of constant rivalry. They are always in conflict. They are opposite forces of nature. They are two different people or two different representation of two sons. Shem, Shem, is the one that is referred to as Shem the penman. He is the artist, he is the poet, he is the force that represent the anti-societal expectations of someone who is always trying to prove themselves. He is messy and he is creative and he's always despised, but he's also the one with the imagination. He is also the one with the creative artistic nature. And some scholars have said that James Joyce wrote Shem as a representation of himself, someone who went outside the conventional writing styles and expectations of societal norms. And yes, he was celebrated, but he was also despised at the same time. Then we have Sean, usually referred to as Sean the postman, and he represents the conventional man. He is obedience, he is a servant of order, he doesn't go outside of the boundaries of imagination. He is what anybody would expect a man to function in any society. And he's always talking about social authority and respectability, and he sort of caves into the pressure of societal norms. And the rivalry is a representation of the eternal contrast between the two brothers. In the Quran is Habil and Qabil. In the Bible they're called Cain and Abel. The Roman story between the twins Romulus and Remus, or the other biblical story about Jacob and Esau. And James Joyce uses them as a representation for the timeless conflict between the two forces, rebellion and obedience. Then comes the final character, the daughter, Izzy or Isabel, Isabel, spelled in many different ways. She is the daughter and a representation of innocence, and she is usually referred to as the moon, and often reflected or mirrored with ALP, the mother. Sometimes the mother is represented, like we said, as the River Liffey in Dublin, and then the moon that overcast or is above the river that's reflecting on the water is the daughter. She's usually associated with youth or younger age and innocence, and she doesn't actually know or isn't aware of her own beauty. She moves around the world as the main character, and nobody's considering her as the main character. What I found most interesting, that in the text, usually Izzy is split into 28 girls who are singing at the same time, like a chorus, and they are singing sometimes the music of ALP, because like we said before, ALP represent the flowing text musical portion, and she is the one, or Izzy is the one who is singing ALP's song. If you still feel confused, you're on the right track. This is confusing, but it's supposed to give structure to the confusion. one thing that my professor told me that helped me sort of see the structure of the book was James Joyce makes one family a representation for all the families in history, and One Night's Dream a representation of human history. This is why some people described Ulysses as the novel of the day, because it takes place, in one day in Dublin. And then the Finnegans Wake is the novel of the night, or the novel of the dream, because it is written like a dream. Because dreams, when we try to retell them to someone else, they're often confusing and shifting and not coherent. Although in our head, when we were experiencing them, they were. And they seemed as real life often, even with their magic, even with their outside the physical boundaries that we are constrained by. Now, how it was written. When people say that Finnegans Wake is impossible to read, they are referring to the language and how the devices of writing is used by James Joyce. And it's not only in English, it's including more than 60 languages, but I don't want to focus on that part. What I will focus on is the devices being used. And there are 3 that are in constant repetition. There are others, but these 3 make 80% of the devices that James Joyce uses. 1, the loop structure. The loop structure represents the cycle of history that repeats itself. The very first sentence of the book is a half of the last sentence of the book. So if you turn to the last page of the book, you read it, the sentence cuts off in the middle, and it continues on the first page of the book. So let me read it to you. The last sentence says, away alone, at last I loved along the. It cuts off mid sentences, there is no period, no comma, nothing. And then the first sentence of the book, really, there's no capital letter of the first word. A river run past even Adams from swerve of shore to bend of bay, brings up by, and then the sentence continues until the paragraph cuts off. You read it. This is the loop structure. And this happens all throughout the book when it comes to the looping dream, the looping characters and the change of characters, the looping of stories of airworkers in the Phoenix Park, of changing versions. That's a repetition of the book, of the history that is a cycle that repeats itself, of similar events happening to different people over and over and over. Second is the use of puns, which is the packing of 2 meanings, sometimes more, into one word or phrase. So for example, whatever we just read in the beginning of the sentence or the book, he says past Eve and Adams, and this refers to a church or actual church in Dublin, but it also points to passes Adam, who is the first man that was ever created. It also points to the story of Eve and Adam. There's another one where he says 3 quarks for Mr. Marks, which sounds like a funny rhyme, but it also is there like a toast where he is saying 3 quarters for Mr. Mark. It's silly, is a pun, and sometimes no one knows what he means by it, but he uses them a lot. Third, which is the most fascinating one and the one that occurs the most, is portmanteau words, which is the combination of multiple words to make one word. And this is when he started to break all the boundaries of language. This is when he started combining languages, and he started combining spellings, and this is where it gets very, very confusing, but also very, very deep. Let me give you a few examples. See the word funeral. It sounds like funeral, but when you break it down, it is broken down into the word fun and funeral. In meaning's term, it turns death into a celebration, into a party, which is what the book is talking about when he is talking about rebirth. This comes where Airworker wakes up at his own wake. Everybody is partying and is getting drunk, and everybody is happy. It's a fun funeral. Another one that he uses, and this one is a little bit more complicated, is commodious vicus of recirculation. Commodious echoes the word spacious, or something that accommodates. The vicus is a Latin word for neighborhood, and recirculation is the representation of the cycle of history repeating itself. 3 words that are in two languages that are spelled differently, but when you read them out loud, they start to hint at the thing that the James Joyce is trying to talk about, while not talking about the thing directly. And then the last one I want to talk about is this massive one that actually happens in the first page of the book, and it's in the third paragraph or the second paragraph, depending on how you want to see it, where the fall happens. Now Erwicker is on the ladder and he falls. The word is, or the paragraph reads, the fall, and then between parentheses, and there is just a bunch of letters next to each other that I will not attempt to read. Is literally nothing. You would think it's nothing, but when you come to decipher it, is 100-letter word that you can break it down of the word thunder in so many languages, because the fall represents thunder, represents the extreme pain. If you look at the 100-letter words, you can break it down into multiple different languages that say the word thunder. James Joyce, ladies and gentlemen. Now, resources that helped me get through the book or understand it or even appreciate it. It takes time, but it happened. Number one is Finnegans Wake, a plot summary by John Gordon. Divided into chapters, and there are sections of the book that are copied, pasted into this book itself, and there are, explanations of what is happening here. I said earlier that there is no plot. This book makes a plot out of whatever plotless novel we are reading in Finnegans Wake. Sometimes I read the summary of the chapter before reading the chapter itself. Sometimes I read it after, and I found out that reading it before helps with saving some of my mental energy from making sense of whatever I'm reading, to appreciating the language and the sound of the words themselves, because essentially you can't understand everything that you are reading from the first go. The second book is a guide, a reader's guide to Finnegans Wake by Williams York Tyndall. Very similar style. It sort of takes the chapter and explains it, and it uses actually line explanations. This one is a little bit more detailed. Sometimes it takes one word and it writes an explanation for that one word. I like this a little bit more, but honestly, a combination of one that gives you the big picture stuff of the chapter, and then the other gives you the details and what they represent. Tyndall does go as far as exploring the history that James Joyce was talking about, the background story of the Greek mythologies that he includes, or the he uses a lot of even Islamic history, and then he dives into that too. One is big picture and the other is more detailed oriented. I will be listing all of these resources in the description below. The links are affiliate links. Feel free to purchase them through those links. But my biggest breakthrough when it comes to appreciating the book was when I found this YouTube channel that was literally dedicated for reading James Joyce. It was an audiobook for free of someone reading James Joyce. I don't know how that person did it. More power to them. The YouTube channel, and I will also link it below, called The Most Ever Company. And I will start by using the guides first and then the listening part delay until later, because once you're at the point where you are just listening and just following on through the book, then you start understanding or appreciating the sounds of the words, and your brain will do that thing where it start picking up the portmanteau words and the puns and deciphering them as the reader is reading for you. Lastly, there are two digital resources that I would recommend. One is fwheat.org or fwheat.org, and this is a search engine website where you can literally look up any word in Finnegans Wake, any section, and it will take you to it, so that you don't have to look for where that section that was interesting for you, whatever the case might be. It also has explanations for those sections. It's a lot like the plot summary of John Gordon, but digitally, and it has a really good accurate search engine. And the second one is the Chicken Guide, and this is sort of reading the book online because it has that structure of a book. It's not like a search engine. You can literally just scroll through the book and go from chapter to chapter. It's literally a book online, but then when you hover around a word or a section, it gives you a pop-up in the bottom, tells you what the meaning of that word mean, what the meaning of the section, where you at with the book, what is James Joyce is talking about in this section. If you've read some of the book and you feel like you are drowning in meaninglessness and you are not finding a sort of solid ground to set your foot on, that website is sort of a good website for you to read from and then read the explanations and the meanings, so that you can build meaning out of whatever section you are reading from. I started the video by admitting that I hated my life while reading this book. Did that change eventually? Honestly, it did. And I was surprised that it did, because I was waiting for it not to, and for me to tell everybody not to read this book. This book is not for anyone to read. It helped me appreciate the boundaries of language and what it means for us to go beyond the boundaries that we set ourselves for us to understand meaning. This weird thing that starts to happen to you when you are reading the book, at least it happened to me, where I start using a lot of portmanteaus and puns with friends. When I took the class, I was with two other colleagues of my program that we took it together, and we had a lot of inside jokes built on the puns that, you know, James Joyce would use, and we would be, you know, in a reading, or we will be hanging out with our other writing friends, and we will say, someone will come into the room and we will say, here comes everybody, maybe is the professor or someone we know, and it becomes funny to just us, which is like a language that we build between each other. Now, should you read the book? And my honest answer is that you should not, unless you have to for a class or you are reading it in a group. The book is not easy to read. It requires a very long breath. It requires stamina and consistency. And without accountability to other people and without sharing the experience of reading the book with other people, I feel, or I find it very, very hard for someone to continue. You can start, but I do not think you can finish, or at least it will take you 17 years, as James Joyce said, because it took him 17 years to write. I think that's it for this video. If you want to find the book, the resources that I mentioned, they are below. If you have read the book, please leave a comment below on your experience. I would love to hear from a fellow Finnegans Wake reader and what their experience was like. If you are currently reading it for whatever reason, let me know how it's been so far. What are your most surprising findings or hardest struggles? I'll be in the comments answering questions, commenting on whatever you comment. I want to hear from your experience, because it will bring back the experience that I experienced while reading the book. In the meantime, salam.